On a spring morning in 1968, a sheriff's deputy drove out to a farm outside New Glarus, Wisconsin, and handed a man named Jonas Yoder a piece of paper. Yoder had pulled his 14-year-old daughter out of school after 8th grade. Wisconsin law said she had to stay until 16. So the state charged him with a crime. He was fined $5. $5 doesn't sound like much, but Jonas Yoder didn't pay it and move on. He fought it, all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And 4 years later, in the spring of 1972, the 9 most powerful judges in the country ruled against the state of Wisconsin and sided with a farmer who doesn't drive a car, doesn't vote in a way anyone would call organized, and has never once hired a lobbyist. That's the pattern. Over and over, for more than a century, the Amish have gone up against the federal government, state legislatures and county health boards and come out the other side still standing. No PAC, no campaign donations, no press conference on the courthouse steps. So how does a community that actively avoids modern politics keep winning fights that law firms spend millions trying to win? Let's start with the one that started it all. By the time Wisconsin dragged Jonas Yoder into court, Amish parents had already been quietly pulling their kids from school after 8th grade for generations. The reasoning wasn't complicated. In an Amish community, education past that point happens on the farm, not in a classroom. A 14-year-old boy is learning to work a team of horses. A 14-year-old girl is learning to run a household and a garden that might feed a family of 10. High school, in their eyes, doesn't add to that. It pulls a kid away from it, toward a world of competition and career ambition that the Amish faith actively teaches its members to resist. Wisconsin's lawyers argued the state had a compelling interest in educating its children, full stop, no exceptions. Yoder's side argued something narrower and, it turned out, more powerful. Force these families to comply, and you don't just interrupt a school schedule. You threaten the survival of an entire religious community that has existed in North America since the 1730s. Chief Justice Warren Burger wrote the majority opinion. 6 justices agreed with him. The Amish, the court ruled, didn't have to send their kids past 8th grade. Wisconsin's compulsory education law hit a wall named the First Amendment, and it lost. Here's the detail almost nobody mentions when they tell this story. Yoder didn't win by hiring the best legal team money could buy. The Amish famously don't sue people, don't take out insurance, don't believe in going to court to settle disputes with each other. A sympathetic Mennonite lawyer named William Ball took the case largely because he believed in it, not because the Amish community showed up with a war chest. They won a landmark religious liberty case while operating almost entirely outside the legal machinery everyone assumes you need to win one. And it wasn't just Jonas Yoder standing in that courtroom. 2 other men, Amos Miller and Aidan Yutzi, were convicted alongside him, and all 3 had refused the same law for the same reason at the same time in the same small county. That's not a coincidence, and it's not an accident of scheduling. It's the pattern showing up in its earliest, clearest form. Nobody in that community broke off to quietly comply while the others took the risk. When the state pushed, the whole church pushed back, together, the same week. That's strike 1 against the government. But taxes are where things get more interesting, because this is the fight where the story stops being a clean underdog win and starts getting complicated. Amish communities have never wanted Social Security. Not because they think the money is bad, but because taking government insurance conflicts with a core belief. When someone in the community gets old or sick or loses a barn to fire, the community itself takes care of them. That's not a metaphor, it's the actual retirement plan, the actual health insurance built entirely out of neighbours who show up. So in 1965, after years of Amish families refusing to pay into a system they'd never draw benefits from, and the IRS seizing horses and farm equipment to collect the debt, Congress carved out an exemption. Self-employed Amish workers didn't have to pay into Social Security. Win number 2. And this time it came from Congress itself blinking first. But then a farmer and carpenter named Edwin Lee decided the exemption should stretch further than Congress meant it to. Lee employed other Amish workers on his farm and in his shop, and he stopped withholding their Social Security taxes too, on the same religious grounds. The IRS came after him. It went all the way to the Supreme Court in 1982. This time, the Amish lost, unanimously, 9-0. The court drew a hard line between a self-employed Amish farmer, who only answers for his own beliefs, and an Amish employer who'd be imposing his religion on employees who might not share it. Chief Justice Berger, the same man who wrote the Yoder decision a decade earlier, wrote this one too, and this time he ruled against the Amish. It's worth sitting with that for a second, because it says something the underdog story usually leaves out. The Amish don't win because judges have a soft spot for beards and buggies. They win when their case fits a very specific legal shape. A sincere religious belief, a community that isn't asking anyone else to bend, and a government interest that isn't strong enough to justify running over it. When that shape breaks, so does the winning streak. If you want the rest of these fights laid out one by one, chapter by chapter, with the actual court documents and the dates that matter, I put the whole thing together in a guide called the Amish Almanac. It's not a big glossy thing, it's just the record, organized the way I wish it had been when I started digging into this. Grab the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen if that's easier for you. All right. Back to it, because the next fight is one most people have never heard of at all. County zoning boards are one thing, state legislatures are another, and the story there is even stranger, because sometimes the Amish lose in court and still end up winning anyway. In western Kentucky, a strict old order group called the Schwarzentruber Amish refused for years to put an orange reflective triangle on the back of their buggies, the same slow-moving vehicle emblem you've probably seen on tractors. Not because they didn't care about safety, because that particular symbol, bright orange on a fluorescent yellow background, is shaped and colored close enough to what their faith considers a worldly display that using it felt like breaking a vow. They offered an alternative instead, grey reflective tape, less visible but still lit up by headlights. The state said no. Police cited them, fines piled up, and when a group of men in Graves County refused to pay those fines on principle, a judge sent 9 of them to jail, sentences running from 3 days to 10. This went all the way up through the Kentucky Court of Appeals and then the Kentucky Supreme Court. And here's the twist: the Amish lost. Every court that heard it ruled the triangle requirement was a legitimate safety law and upheld the convictions. But while those men were sitting in a county jail over reflective tape, Kentucky lawmakers were already drafting a bill to change the law itself, and it passed. The legislature carved out an exception, letting Amish buggies use the grey tape as an alternative, the same accommodation the courts had just refused to order. The Amish didn't win the lawsuit. They won anyway, because 9 men choosing jail over compliance did something a legal brief never could. It turned a technical safety regulation into a story the whole state was suddenly paying attention to, and the people who write the laws decided the fight wasn't worth having. That's a version of the same leverage showing up somewhere the courts had actually shut the door. Amish farms don't look like the farms a county building code was written to regulate. There's no septic engineer's stamp on a hand-dug privy. There's no electrician's permit for a barn that was never wired for electricity in the first place, because old order communities generally reject a direct hookup to the public grid as a step toward a level of worldly convenience they've chosen to live without. Health inspectors show up, expecting a modern operation, and find horse-drawn ploughs, wood cook stoves, and outhouses that predate the regulation by 150 years. County after county has run into the same wall Wisconsin ran into with Yoda, just smaller and quieter. Force full compliance and you don't get a modernized farm, you get families who close up and move to the next state over instead. Rather than fight that losing trade over and over, plenty of counties have simply carved out variances, letting Amish landowners meet the spirit of a safety code through alternatives, like a properly built outhouse instead of a septic system, without meeting the letter of it. It's not a Supreme Court case. Nobody writes a headline about it. It's just the same underlying leverage showing up at the smallest possible scale, and it works almost every time. Zoning officers and county judges are one kind of fight. The military draft is a different animal entirely, because this time the government wasn't just a landlord or a tax collector, it was asking young men to go fight a war. During both world wars, and again through Korea and Vietnam, young Amish men faced conscription the same as everyone else. And the Amish are pacifists, going back to the same 1500s roots as the Mennonites, refusing to carry a weapon on religious grounds that predate the United States by 2 centuries. You'd expect that to end badly. Refused to serve during wartime, and the government has, historically, not been gentle about it. Instead, the United States built an entire alternative around them. Conscientious objector status let drafted Amish men serve in what was called civilian public service, working in forestry camps, hospitals, and soil conservation projects instead of combat units. It wasn't a total victory. Some young Amish men who refused even non-combat service were jailed, and the road to get official recognition wasn't handed over easily. But over decades, what started as a narrow religious exemption for a handful of small denominations became a permanent, government-run system that still exists today. The government didn't just lose this fight, it built the Amish an entire off-ramp and kept it running for 80 years. Now here's the part of the story that isn't finished yet. And it's the one currently playing out in real time in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. An Amish dairy farmer named Amos Miller has spent the better part of a decade selling raw, unpasteurized milk and cheese directly to a private buyers club, thousands of members strong, who want it that way on purpose. Pennsylvania law says you need a state permit to sell raw milk to the public. Miller doesn't have one. And for years he ran a private membership model that let him operate in a grey zone the state never quite closed. Then, in January of 2024, state agriculture officials raided his farm. They tied some of his products to illnesses reported in other states. The Pennsylvania Attorney General filed a lawsuit stretching over 300 pages. A judge issued an injunction. Miller's supporters, Amish neighbours among them, rallied outside the Lancaster County Courthouse in their straw hats, and the case picked up support from an unlikely coalition of political figures who saw it as a fight over food freedom, not just farming. Unlike Yoda, this one hasn't ended in a clean win. A judge has blocked Miller from selling raw milk inside Pennsylvania, though a higher court has let him keep selling to customers outside the state while the case grinds on. The state's offer is almost insultingly simple. Apply for the same permit the other 114 raw milk dairies in Pennsylvania already have, and this all goes away. Miller hasn't taken that offer. As of now, nobody knows how it ends. But look at what's actually happening underneath the headlines, and you start to see the same machinery that won Yoda, won the Social Security exemption, and built an entire alternative service system for conscientious objectors. Miller isn't fighting this with a team of Amish lawyers and a lobbying budget. He's fighting it the same way every Amish legal battle gets fought. Refuse to comply, absorb the consequences personally rather than pass them off, and let the community's visible, collective refusal do the work that a campaign contribution would do for anyone else. So what actually is the mechanism? Because by now, the pattern should be obvious, even if nobody's said it outright yet. The Amish don't win by playing the game better than everyone else. They win by refusing to play a version of it that most groups can't afford to skip. They don't vote as a bloc because most old order communities discourage voting entirely, which means politicians can't buy their support and can't be punished by it either. They don't hire lobbyists because paying someone to influence government on your behalf runs against the same humility that keeps their barns unpainted and their buggies black. What they have instead is something almost no other group in America still has intact: total, visible, generational unity. When an Amish community decides a law is intolerable, there isn't a faction that quietly complies while another one protests. Everyone refuses, together, in public, and everyone is willing to go to jail, pay the fine, or lose the farm, rather than break that line. That's not a legal strategy, it's a religious commitment that happens to function like one. Courts and legislatures are built to respond to exactly two things: overwhelming legal argument or overwhelming, undeniable sincerity that can't be dismissed as a political stunt. The Amish rarely have the first. They almost always have the second, in a form that's nearly impossible to fake, because faking it would mean faking an entire way of life for multiple generations. Think about what that actually costs a government to fight. A lobbyist can be outspent. A voting bloc can be out-organized or just waited out until the next election cycle. But how do you out-negotiate a farmer who has already decided he will go to jail before he signs the form, and who has 400 neighbors who've made the exact same decision, none of whom are bluffing? There's no leverage point. There's no deal to cut with someone who wants nothing from the system in the first place. Every other interest group in Washington is playing to win something. The Amish, more often than not, are just trying to be left alone. And it turns out that's one of the hardest positions in the country to argue against in open court. And that's the real answer to the question this video opened with. Not a secret legal loophole, not a hidden war chest. A community that decided, roughly 3 centuries ago, that the cost of standing together was smaller than the cost of bending, and has simply never stopped paying it. Which raises the question worth sitting with after this video ends. Every one of these fights costs something real. A fine, a farm, a decade of a man's life spent in court instead of in a field. The Amish keep winning. But winning isn't free, even when you refuse to play the game everyone else is playing. So the next time you hear about a community beating the government without a single lawyer on retainer, the real question isn't how they did it. It's whether you'd be willing to pay what they paid to do it too.